So I've been toying with this video idea for a while. Was kind of trying to figure out how to title it and exactly kind of pulling together what I was trying to communicate. And then I realized, and people who are doing the YouTube thing, you know this, like, it doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter. Just post the fucking video, right? So that's what we're doing. The title and or point of this video is this kind of concept of artistic expression meeting commercial perfection. You know, it's got a good little catchphrase there. So what got me to this point of the video or whatever was this sort of idea of loving a lot of different bands and artists and loving all different eras of bands or artists, right? Because you talk to a lot of people who like certain bands or whatever, and it's like, I really like their early stuff until they sold out, right? But then you talk to other people and they'll say, oh, like that, gazillion selling record, like that's why I love that band, right? So it's always one of those interesting things, right? Like a lot of times the band or artist or whatever, they gain all this popularity because of this huge album or a huge song or whatever that they put out, and maybe it alienates some of their old fans or maybe not. And so that was kind of part of this idea was, okay, what about those albums though that kind of do both in the sense of it doesn't quite alienate all their old, fans who were there since the beginning, but at the same time has this commercial and slick kind of perfection to it, right? It's accessible. It's the record that you would recommend to a new listener. But again, it still has kind of traces of that old, whatever that we love about the band, right? And I say again I'm someone who finds myself not only liking a lot of different types of music, but a lot of different eras and being able to respect those eras, knowing that there are so many different variables that could impact why a band or artist changes sound or why they would quote unquote sell out or whatever, right? I've often joked too of, the difference between a band quote unquote selling out versus a band that finds their sound. Because as it turns out, a lot of times we'll point to bands in their early records and say, oh, they really struggled to find their sound. It wasn't until this record that they really found their sound. Or was that selling out, right? So that's enough blabbing. I have 10 records here. Pretty classic rock driven, a little bit of prog here and there. Of records that I feel, again, do both, right? It is an homage to the music that they created up until that point, while also reaching this sort of, perfection in terms of commercialism or corporatism, or accessibility, or whatever you want to call it. And so, done yapping, whatever. Let's just start, and this might be the perfect example, right? Okay, so first record that I think is the perfect example is arguably the greatest record of all fucking time, right? Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon. Why do I start with this? Well, it's just a great record to show anyway. But to me, again, it sort of epitomizes what I'm talking about here, right? This is a multi-gazillion seller, in the grand scheme of record buying and selling. But it's a progressive rock record, or is it, right? It's conceptual, it all sort of flows. It's got instrumental tracks on there. It's got musique concrète on there. Any color you like is not exactly a banger that you play at the bar, unless you're me, right? But it also has money. It also has Us and Them, which is almost like a jazz track. You know what I mean? Like it has these hits. And so to me, this was the reason that this record works as much as it does is because it has that accessibility. It has that commercialism. It's the place to start, right? Now, I love, Piper at the Gates of Dawn and all that quirky, weird stuff. And I love the Division Bell, and I love most of what came between, right? But to me, it's the perfect kind of combination of kind of, again, that psychedelic, weird, trippy stuff where it was coming from. And then obviously this sense of commercialism, the sense of quote unquote corporatism, whatever you want to call it, that really sold. So I'm hoping that record sort of lays the groundwork for the examples I'm giving here. Let's go to a prog band and one of my favorite prog bands. Now, a lot of people might call this a selling out record, and for a long time I did too. And there's a couple of different records that you could use for this, but again, to me, it's the commercialism here, right? This record, I believe, has to be their highest selling record. A lot of that is due to one big fucking hit that none of us need to ever hear again. I believe this is 1983, 90125 from Yes. Okay, so for the longest time, this was what I labeled as like, this is a selling out record, right? This is Yes going, whatever sort of thing. Because of Owner of a Lonely Heart, I get it. But then you hear songs like It Can Happen, right? Which is just the perfect progressive pop song. Changes. What a fucking prog, complex masterpiece that is, right? The production on this record is absolutely outstanding. I mean, it's Trevor Horn, who's one of the greatest producers out there. Cinema is absolutely amazing too. Hearts closes it out. This again is a perfect kind of combination of the progressive rock that we loved about Yes, meeting what was going on musically in the 80s and what they needed to do, truthfully, to kind of stay relevant. Yeah, a lot of that is coming from, stuff that was going on with the Buggles guys and all that type of stuff. Cool. But don't let people tell you this is just a random pop record here. There's some amazing progressive pop on here. That's outstanding. One of my favorite bands, there was one other record I could have gone with, which would have been the obvious pick, but to me, I'm going to go with this pick because A, it was first, and therefore I think it deserves a little bit more credit. One of my favorite bands, Canadian, progressive hard rock, you know where I'm going, it's Rush, right? So what would be the Rush record? Well, their pop record, would have been like Power Windows, even Hold Your Fire, but I think a lot of people look at those records and go, on there. The obvious choice would have obviously been Moving Pictures, but to me, I'm going one step earlier than that, and I'm going to go with Permanent Waves, because again, to me, this was the record that laid the groundwork in terms of this perfect combination between a lot of the complex proggy stuff that they were doing, and the people that love Farewell to Kings and love Hemispheres and all that kind of stuff, but also getting stuff like Spirit of the Radio, right? I mean, Spirit of the Radio is one of those songs I've heard a gazillion times on the radio, and I could hear a gazillion more. I freaking love that song. What an amazing, progressive pop, hard rock song, whatever you want to call it. You also have Free Will on here, which is great, but then you get shit like Jacob's Ladder. You get Natural Science, right? You get some of those tracks where you're just like, what is going on? Like, that is such an old school kind of Rush thing. So to me, for this example, I'm going to go with Permanent Waves from Rush as my sort of perfect combination. Here's one that, depending on who you are, right, not necessarily the perfect combination of old school and new school per se, but I think this is such a perfect pop record that even the old school fans of this band were like, it might be selling out, but that's a damn good record. Back to 83, I think, Avalon from Roxy Music. Now, Roxy Music's kind of an interesting, they've always been an interesting band and very difficult to pigeonhole, right? They sort of, I guess, fell into that glam thing, but really they didn't. I mean, they don't sound anything like T-Rex or Bowie or whatever at the time. I mean, to me, Roxy Music always sounded like proto-new wave, really. And, obviously Brian Ferry, and he's brilliant and really sort of dialed into that sort of vibe years before new wave was a thing. Now, my favorite Roxy Music record is the second record, For Your Pleasure. To me, that's like their prog record. But they had a span of just really strong records going through the mid-70s. Kind of had a couple of hiccups here and there in the late 70s, a breakup, all that different stuff. And then this was their kind of the pinnacle and their last album they released, Avalon. I've always loved the cover. The production on this record is absolutely outstanding. And this was a record that really sort of is credited with starting the quote-unquote sophistopop genre, right? Which, depending on who you are, is a good thing or a bad thing. But this is such a beautiful, accessible, commercial, slick pop record that even those old school fans who grew up with like the self-titled and all the Eno era, is going, damn, you know what? That is a really good record. So that's why I'm going to go with, for Roxy Music, is Avalon. Okay, some people are going to roll their eyes because this is a type of music that some of y'all just, you like to hate on, but that's okay because for me, I feel like I am the representation of this type of music in real life. I'm gonna go with the band Styx because I fucking love Styx. Right now, I think a lot of Styx purists, lest we forget, they started on the classic Chicago record label Wooden Nickel before jumping to A&M. And those records are amazing, right? These are all before Tommy Shaw was in the band, and they're kind of progressive but weird. I love those early records, right? And then obviously you get to a point with like Cornerstone and Kilroy was here and all that kind of stuff where it's like, I think we've jumped the shark, boys. But to me, Grand Illusion and I'm going to throw in Pieces of Eight too are the perfect records, start to finish, for a variety of reasons. Most importantly, you have these huge hits that blew them into like superstardom, at least here in the United States. I don't think Styx ever really blew up overseas or even in Canada for that matter. But what really blew them into superstardom were hits on here. Obviously, the title track is outstanding. But what you have here is you have like side A, which are like the hits, and then you have side B, which is where you have Miss America, which is this absolute banger by J.Y. Sorry, copyright. But then how side B ends is a progressive masterpiece. And I know a lot of people aren't going to call Styx prog because, you haven't listened to the record. But I'm telling you, man, you go from Man in the Wilderness, which is a just absolute fucking epic from Tommy, right? Into Castle Walls, into the grand finale. That whole side B, you know what? Take your hits on side A. They're all brilliant, but take your hits on side A. Give me side B every day of the week on this record, and it's absolutely outstanding. But that's what makes this for the example, is you have that side A of those radio hits that blew them into superstardom with the side B that absolutely kicks my taint. Here's another sort of OG back to 71 that really fits the bill here. And of course, it's Jethro Tull's Aqualung, right? One of my favorite records of all time. But the reason this record is so strong for me is because you had three, I guess, huge hits, right? You had Cross-Eyed Proud Mary. That's a good joke. You have the title track, obviously, Locomotive Breath, right? What an absolute banger. But then you got these deep cuts, like My God was huge. Is such an absolute corker. You like that, Ben? One of my favorite, if not my favorite, Jethro Tull song of all time is Wind Up. You got these little kind of folky interludes with Wondering Aloud, which is beautiful, and, whatever, Mother Goose, or all these different things, right? That's why it fits so well, is because you have this combination of those hits that are going to get played and people are going to go, who's Jethro Tull? All that type of stuff. But then you get the full album and you're like, man, this is a full experience, unlike anything else, right? Love Aqualung. So this was a little bit of an interesting one, right? Another one of my favorite bands. Let's talk about Genesis. Now, Genesis is a little bit more complicated because there's so many eras. You have like the old classic Peter Gabriel era, and then you have like the pop era, right? And there's a lot in between there, but I am going to focus on the in between. So for me, the sweet spot, and this kind of leads into that concept of where would I start someone? Because to me, this is a progressive pop masterpiece. The production is outstanding. Sonically, it's just amazing. And again, the combination is there where you had these hits that were kind of, absolutely platforming them into complete superstardom. But then you had these odes, right? These like nods to the progressive rock. I don't know about you all. I'm going to go with Duke. Duke's going to be my pick for Genesis. And again, it's exactly what I said, right? They're coming off of, and then there were three after Steve Hackett left the band. And this would be their second one that's after that sort of period. Already their 10th record, 1980. But again, when you have like Duke's Travels and all that type of stuff thrown in there with a couple of those bigger hits, Turn It On Again, which was a huge pop hit in an odd time signature, which we absolutely love. Misunderstanding, bit of that ballad on there. And I think, was it Duchess 2 was a little bit of a hit? Now, apparently all that was supposed to be part of like this 32-minute long epic or something that they were really leaning into, but decided to kind of pull it back so that they could release some of those as singles. And then they didn't want to kind of draw a comparison to Supper's Ready and all this type of stuff. But, when you think about the Duke Travels, Duke's End, you get this 10-minute sort of epic piece. This record flows so perfectly, so beautifully together that, again, it's just that perfect combination for me. So I love Duke a lot, and that's my pick, at least for Genesis, for this sort of concept. Here's one of my favorite artists too. Oh, you okay, buddy? Sorry, new cat, he's sneezing. Buddy, you all right, man? He's fine. One of my favorite artists, and speaking of Genesis, let's talk about Peter Gabriel. Now, Peter Gabriel released, 4 outstanding self-titled records, and then 1986 rolls around, and that's my pick, and I'm going to go with So. Again, you probably had a number of Peter Gabriel fans who were like, oh my gosh, really? Like, this is an absolute menace in terms of just absolute radio perfection, right? I mean, Sledgehammer, obviously, In Your Eyes, a perfect kind of pop song. Don't Give Up with the great Kate Bush on there. Red Rain is what kicks off. Red Rain, what a beautiful song. Mercy Street, absolutely incredible. And then Big Time, right? So it's like you had these gigantic hits, right? Sledgehammer and Big Time and In Your Eyes were like super blasted, still on radio all the time, right? But then you had like what I would call like tier 2 hits, right? Things like Red Rain, Mercy Street, Don't Give Up, right? And then some of the deeper cuts too. There's like part of me that wants to not like this or not love this record as much as I do, but it's so perfect for all those reasons that I mentioned before. I don't even know how many I got. Well, here's maybe an obvious one, but I think it absolutely epitomizes the concept I'm talking about. Now, this is just the band's second record, but I think you get some old school people who are like, no, man, give me the hurting, man. I want to hurt, baby girl. Songs from the Big Chair, Tears for Fears, 1985. Again, that sort of progressive pop, art rock sort of thing, but it's that perfect combination. You had things like Shout, Everybody Wants to Rule the World, Head Over Heels, right? But then when you had things like The Working Hour, man, what a track that is, right? You had Listen, you had Broken. You have these other tracks on there that allow this to be a really strong album. Because I think you also, especially around this time, you would have these albums that sold a gazillion copies, but they sold a gazillion copies because of a couple of songs, Brothers in Arms. Not necessarily because of the strength of the album itself, but because of the strength of the songs. All right, one of my favorite bands, y'all might giggle at this one. I don't give a fuck what you want to do. But I'm going to talk about Def Leppard. Now, you have these kind of two different fan bases here, right? You have fans of like those first 2 records when they were like new wave of British heavy metal and they just absolutely smoke all over the place. And then you had the people who came in when they were all over MTV and blew up overnight and sold a gazillion records with Hysteria and all that type of stuff. But to me, the record that, although I love Hysteria to death and I don't care who knows it, to me, the record that really, again, epitomizes this concept is Pyromania, right? You had these 3 mega hits, right? Rock of Ages, Photograph, Foolin'. You had a couple of those like secondary hits, like Too Late for Love, some of the other stuff. But then you got these deep tracks, right? Die Hard, The Hunter, Billy's Got a Gun, Stage Fright, all that type of stuff that really kind of pulls this all together. So to me, it's like if someone wanted to know where to start with Def Leppard, I'd go here. Because I'd say, you know what, if you want to lean into a little bit more of the heavier riff rock and stuff, go earlier. And if you want to lean into more of the pop, album-oriented stuff, go a little bit later with something like Hysteria. But for me, Pyromania is the pick. And last and certainly not least, man, I love this record. I might go listen to it right now because I can. We're going to go to 80s sort of proto-progressive metal. We're going to go with the band Queensryche. And I'm going to go with Empire. So Queensryche's coming off of Operation Mindcrime, which is an absolute classic, one of the most important records ever, especially for that genre, right? And then in the early 90s, what was this, 91 or 92, they put out Empire, which, again, production is so perfect. I mean, this is one of the best sounding commercial records ever. The challenge with this is, of course, this is how it goes, right? Silent Lucidity comes off this record. One of the biggest, best power ballads ever. Now all of a sudden people are starting to call them hair metal. They're not. It's on all like your QVC, buy this CD because of the power ballad sort of thing. Look, Silent Lucidity is a great song. It does not represent Queensryche by any means. But I'll tell you what does, man. Jet City Woman, what a perfect commercial radio, rock, hard rock, progressive rock, metal song. Best I Can's amazing. Della Brown's incredible. It's another rainy night without you. Empire, Empire, Empire. amazing, man. This whole fucking record is absolutely smokes. And again, it's this combination of some of these outstanding kind of deeper cuts, what's going on there, mixed with a lot of the commercial stuff. This record sold a gazillion. A lot of that, again, is because of songs like Jet City Woman, Silent Lucidity. But there's so much on here that is absolutely corking. So there you go, 20 minutes later. Thanks for blabbing. This isn't a thread or anything like that, but if you want to make a video in response to it, more power to you, or let me know your thoughts. And, you know, I just got to thank y'all for torturing yourself for watching this nonsense, and hope everybody is doing well out there. Yeah, we'll see you on the next one. Cheers. Bye.